Public infrastructure, whether roads or buildings, is provided for by government for delivery of economic and social services to the community. For the effective delivery of social services, public facilities have to be well maintained so that people can do business in a safe and conducive environment. On today's edition of News in Depth, Macpherson Mukuka looks at the maintenance of public infrastructure. I'm your host, Ruth Kamwi. Stay tuned.
Wastewater oozing out through a broken pipe and uncovered toilet tank has turned green with Spirogera. The summary of it is a strong stench describing many years of lack of maintenance. Here, a broken ceiling screams for help, showing the dark space that is meant to be concealed, even as the facility provides social services to members of the public. This is a general characteristic and common sight inside most public facilities in Zambia. With over 5 decades of their existence, most of these facilities have seen some minor maintenance works, such as vacuuming, patch-ups, painting and other facelifting groundworks, but their state still leaves more to be desired. Just like the Findeco House, many historical buildings, state infrastructure, and other public assets do not benefit from any coordinated periodic maintenance. National monuments are defaced and mostly in deplorable state as a result of the absence of quality management for publicly managed facilities. Government is aware of the unpleasant sight of public facilities.
And infrastructure being, such a critical component in the within the process of providing, public service, we have to make sure that we maintain this infrastructure on a sustainable basis. And we think that we have to, to up our game in terms of managing this infrastructure. His Excellency the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, has insisted that the Zambians must get top-notch public service. And we think in the absence of serviceable or serviced infrastructure, it's virtually impossible to render this service. Therefore, the component of maintaining infrastructure is very key to public service.
In our investigation, we found that most public facilities have yawning ceilings. Defective air conditioning and parts of the walls are exposed from worn-out woodwork. The situation is worsened by termites, which have found a conducive home. Sadly, even one of the most utilized public properties, the road, is also a victim of the absence of maintenance. But what could be the reason behind this continued appalling state of public infrastructure?
According to the way the roads are made, every 3 months, these engineers are supposed to go and check, because anytime anything can happen. But does that happen? It doesn't. Why? You hear, no, there is no fund for that. Funding is a problem. But ideally, they are supposed to be checking after 3 months. Coming to the buildings, there should be a policy.
Public infrastructure such as office blocks, schools, clinics, and others are set up to satisfy social and administrative needs of the people as a means to the fulfillment of economic responsibilities for the general public. Occasionally, inspections are conducted to determine whether or not a public building complies with the prescribed conditions for them to operate.
We have situations where some buildings have been inspected and other buildings have not yet been inspected, but the program is there to ensure that buildings are inspected and advice is given to the managers of those buildings. So once a building is inspected, an inspection is conducted by health inspectors and they will look at the different defects. So when the defects are pointed out, the inspections are usually conducted in consultation or with the people who are managing the building. So the things will be pointed out there and then when the inspection is being conducted. And after the inspection is done, then a letter is written to the owners or the managers of the building so that they can work on the different defects which have been found.
Poor maintenance of public infrastructure assets shortens their useful lives, causes faults, hastens breakdown, and undermines service delivery and increase backlogs in access to amenities. Well-maintained infrastructure, on the other hand, serves consumers' needs, supports economic production, and with it, employment, taxes, and rates are enhanced. However, the state of most public infrastructure in Zambia is undesirable.
Is the infrastructure habitable? Is it in a state where it is able to provide the service we want? I have come to think that the first thing is we need to create awareness of what is public infrastructure, okay? Where is it? What are the numbers? So in other words, we are looking for information-backed planning. Okay, we are looking to ensure that we plan based on information. I'll tell you that some of the infrastructure is okay, others not so good, and we have to work on that part of infrastructure which is not so good.
But what constitutes a habitable public facility?
There should be adequate toilet facility to ensure that people do not really contaminate in terms of fecal matter whenever they want to go to answer the call of nature. So they need to ensure that there is adequate issues of prevention of infestation. For instance, we're talking about cockroaches, we're talking about rats. Those things are not supposed to be found in public buildings, and there are specific things which are supposed to be done in order to avoid such kind of infestation. So we advise the public building managers to ensure that they deal with specific issues to avoid infestation and to avoid any kind of situation which might lead to buildings becoming inhabitable.
Historically, in the underfunded public sector, maintenance practices are poor because maintenance was perceived as an avoidable task and an insignificant addition to the quality of public property. Also, there was a concern for the expending of scarce resources that could be better placed. Owing to this, maintenance of public properties such as historical buildings, state offices, basic amenities, and other publicly managed assets is poor in Zambia. This has driven some public properties to a point of near collapse, while others continue to deface and to a larger extent lose value as a result.
From independence, again, we neglected a number of core roads in terms of maintaining them. So I think in the recent years we have seen quite a lot of investment, both in the rehabilitation, construction and maintenance of our roads. And there's been quite a lot of improvement. But I think there is still a need for a lot of investment, especially in the feeder roads.
The causes of little or no maintenance are, among other elements, attributed to inadequate funding for maintenance and severe technical skill shortages. Suspension of preventive maintenance, diversion of budgets to other recurrent expenditure, and the failure to use integrated systems for asset management in government structures also need to be reconsidered. Good practice guidelines for planning, designing and implementing maintenance programs should also be identified.
We must have a maintenance system. We must have a bridge maintenance system. We need to have the buildings maintenance system. So we must have a place where this building was, this school, this clinic was built in this particular time. We know the materials used. We know the lifespan of the materials. Well, beyond that, so we need to have a database somewhere. Somebody must be doing that, and within the Ministry of Works and Supply. And also, we must have officers employed that are doing routine checkups and routine maintenance so that we do not allow a situation to go to that. Remember, once the ceiling begins to fall, that will mean the ward is not going to be used. And if the ward is not going to be used, the public are deprived of the services which government intends to provide. So I think that's a very critical thing that we need to do. We should have a schedule. This building needs to be repainted. This ceiling must be repainted and replace other components by this date. I think that is very critical, that database should be maintained in that regard.
The desire for improved maintenance practices is often expressed by activists, political leaders, and the populace. But the hunger to execute is very low. Resulting from this, the issue of poor maintenance practices in Zambia has enjoyed public debate, but without the necessary accompanying action. The good news is that the Ministry of Works and Supply is in the process of putting things in order by developing a national infrastructure maintenance strategy.
We are developing a policy, a national infrastructure maintenance policy. This is a zero draft. The draft that we are reviewing right now, and once we review this policy, we take it to cabinet and it's approved. This policy is going to make sure that we develop plans that are actually speaking to our situation. This policy is going to help us to make sure that we consolidate this work and begin to plan properly for our maintenance activities to be coordinated.
For the transport sector, the road maintenance policy is already in effect, as can be seen from the many road rehabilitation and construction works across the country.
We do have a road maintenance strategy. This is a strategy document that was developed and is running from the year 2015 to 2024. And this is a blueprint document that gives us guidelines on how to go about as far as maintenance of works is concerned. Emergencies, for instance, so in this particular document, there are also procedures in as far as emergencies are concerned. In case of washerways, what do we do? So it gives you the do's and the don'ts.
Evidently, the goal of maintenance is mainly preservation. Hence, maintenance practices are often carried out to restore the operational state of an asset at a reduced cost in order to enhance its lifespan. Although majority of these maintenance practices are routine and ordinary, there are also periodic schedules that require that the facility is closed down to the public in order to ensure that maintenance activities are undertaken effectively.
For highways, we have also scheduled periodic maintenance. For highway and the district roads, we have scheduled periodic maintenance. This maintenance sometimes it can come after 10 years or after 15 years, depending on the design lifespan of that road. After that, then we go into what is called rehabilitation or reconstruction, depending on the state of the road and also on the increase of the traffic volume on a particular road.
In spite of this, the proper maintenance of public property has not been given the deserved attention. As a result, Zambia's development is restricted by a gap in infrastructure deficit and apparently poor maintenance of existing public property.
Most of the infrastructure or culverts which we lost or bridges which we lost are those which have outlived their lifespan. Most of them are those which were constructed in the late 70s. We have had a program under the RDA actually to replace most of this, especially the AMCO pipe culverts. And those ones during the replacement exercise, which looks to be in good condition, and we schedule them to do them at the later stage. These are the ones we saw getting washed away. The Musus Bridge in Eastern Province near Lundazi, on Great North Road, the one which was washed away. You remember the other year we had another one washed away in Ilopra Province near Kawambwa. Most of these has been as a result of old age, these pipes being corroded because these are steel pipes.
Inadequate infrastructure and poor maintenance of existing ones are typical characteristics of developing nations. Although developing countries continue to invest heavily in new infrastructure, the sustainability of existing ones suffer from poor maintenance culture. Maintenance is proactive.
It's the issue of planning by government itself, government agencies to be able to plan and have enough budgets for maintenance. And I'm aware that the Ministry of Works and Supply now, they are taking maintenance of public infrastructure very, very critically, and that is a welcome move as far as we are concerned as the National Council. So much needs to be, I think, to be done in terms of maintaining this infrastructure that we are building.
Government of the Republic of Zambia has spent a lot of money in building infrastructure, and the aim is clear. Let Zambians have infrastructure to facilitate service to them. But some of this infrastructure is, left to deteriorate. Some is well kept, I must say. I was particularly impressed with some of the areas I visited at the stadium, and not so happy with certain areas. So clearly you can tell that some people are paying attention to this infrastructure, and some people are not paying as much attention. So we want to create an awareness and ensure that our people can begin to pay attention to this investment in which the Zambian people, have put in so much, because it needs to be available to serve the Zambians.
The nature of maintenance practices undertaken in most facilities can be described as preventive and predictive. Preventive maintenance practices include thorough cleaning, parts replacement, tightening and structure adjustment. In predictive maintenance, facilities are considered to deserve service attention only when direct evidence exists that deterioration has happened. This applies to both buildings and roads.
What we have been doing, pothole patching, is just part of the emergency works. There is what is known as a defect liability period. This is a period where, in case of any defect on the road, the contractor is obligated to take care of that road in terms of maintenance. But then there are those roads that are beyond the defect liability period, and this is where they'll come in with maintenance procedures, and some of those are pothole patching. And so that is a short-term intervention, but the long-term intervention means reconstructing the road.
The goal of infrastructure maintenance is to sustain the life of major assets. When maintenance is provided too soon or too late, it will incur unnecessary cost and compromise the asset's economic lifespan. In instances where a contractor finishes and hands over a project, a limited time, termed as defect liability period, is set to allow the contractor to come back and work in case of defects. This is usually done to ensure the building or road handed over does not give the occupant problems in the early stages of its operation. The National Small and Medium Scale Contractors Association of Zambia feel the 1-year period given is too minimal and needs to be revised.
When a building collapses, it injures or kills people. That's when we start now reminding ourselves we are now supposed to do maintenance. No, maintenance is supposed to be done periodically. So, what I am suggesting, or what we are suggesting as National Association for Medium and Small Scale Contractors, when a contractor is given a contract to put up a building, let them extend that defect liability. Say 3 years, such a contractor is given to maintain, to attend to whatever happens. So in the contract, they should consider that, so that even funding for that period is provided for.
Adequate spending on care of assets leverages public expenditure by protecting investment already made in infrastructure and helping to sustain service delivery. Consequence to this, continuous maintenance activities are necessary to maintain or improve project quality.
Firstly, these drainage structures, the bridges, were that time made of corrugated metals, and these are Amco culverts. And what we are doing now is to have these replaced to concrete culverts, because these are more or less climate resilient structures. We also have to look at hydraulic structures that will be able to withstand any sort of pressure in as far as excessive flow of water in a river. And so this will then mean that our structures will be able to withstand that pressure.
Maintenance should be considered as an important aspect in the infrastructure development of the country. For this to happen, facilities need good policy, planning, and implementation. Maintenance of existing infrastructure should not be seen of secondary importance to the apparently more attractive option of new infrastructure. But there are challenges. Among them is climate change affecting nearly all belt and road facilities. Nonetheless, the National Council for Construction has a suggestion.
You must know that a particular building, a particular phase of a building will be hit by rains, and therefore what kind of material should you use and so forth. But there are also adverse aspects of the climate. For example, we've just been, we are hearing that our neighboring nations, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, are hit by the cyclone. So now these are a more enhanced kind of impacts of climate. But now we understand that climate is real. Climate change rather is real, so we need, I think, to begin to take into consideration in our designs when we are designing infrastructure. For example, if it's a bridge, now we know that we may exceed the maximum recorded rainfall in Mbala, so we should be able to give a provision, a tolerance, an allowance to be able to carry those shocks.
Other than the adverse effects of climate change being a challenge, vandalism to public infrastructure is also rife in most parts of the country.
We have had some washaway as a result of vandalism, where our communities, where these roads are, they go to dig out these steel Amco pipes because they want to use the steel either for making pots, for making maybe an axe, a hoe, or indeed a plow. And then the road remains suspended.
These things we are using here where we are in this office, it's a public office. It was built by the public, and I'm using this office to render service to the public. So if I vandalize this place, I must be held accountable. And if I am found to be doing that by anybody, that person should immediately think that I am not using their money wisely, and a red flag should be raised.
Maintaining infrastructure comes at a cost, but it is a prudent investment which saves significantly in the medium to long term and promotes both the economic and human capital development. The local authority and an association of contractors have advised the community to care for the public assets.
If at all we continuously damage the components of these public buildings, then we're not developing, because the managers or owners of these public buildings, which it comes back to us as the Zambian citizenry, we are the owners, and it will come back to us because we'll continue working on the same things time and time again, instead of us going to work on other also important matters. So issues of vandalism should not be tolerated.
Where you see that there is something maybe on the road, just as an ordinary person, there is something wrong, report that to the authorities. In this situation, report that either to RDA or to Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing.
Public infrastructure is essential for sustainable development of a nation. Hence, improving the quality of state property is an important national decision. Maintenance norms and standards have been developed for the road sector, while for the belt infrastructure, they are yet to be developed. Based on the maintenance standards, budgeting norms must be developed to facilitate accurate, long-term maintenance through budget forecasting, taking into account the type, age, and condition of the infrastructure. Ultimately, the nation will save financially while serving the public efficiently.
That's all we had for you on this week's edition of News in Depth, where Macpherson Mukuka was looking at the maintenance of public infrastructure for effective delivery of services. I've been your host, Ruth Kamwi. Be sure to join us next week as we bring to you another exciting edition of News in Depth. God bless.